America's coming bankruptcy, and he's the host of the Schiff show. Mr. Pierce.
I don't really do the Schiff show, the radio show anymore. I used to do that 5 days a week, but now I just do a podcast. So I guess you can call it the Schiff podcast. But I do that occasionally on Schiff Radio, the same website that I used to do the daily radio show. But anyway, instead of just talking, I'm going to find out what the people in this room are kind of more interested in hearing me talk about, or I can just answer your questions. But I can even talk to you about, I guess, the U.S. economy. I can talk to you about the financial markets. I can talk about gold. I can talk about politics, the U.S. election. I mean, what are you guys more interested in hearing about?
I said, what is Aleppo?
Yeah.
But actually, I said it kind of as a joke.
I think it's probably a branded dog food or something.
Yeah.
All Gary Johnson had to say is, can you be a little more specific?
Right.
Because all he says is, what you can do about Aleppo. I go, what? Can you be more specific? And then he would have given it away, would have known what it was.
Right.
Because that question came out of left field, because, he wasn't even, they were talking about, this strategy, do you take more votes from Democrats, do you take more votes from Republicans? And then out of left field, it was like, what are you going to do about Aleppo? I don't know, where did that even come from? It seems like they were just totally setting them up, knowing that, maybe you will. In fact, the interesting thing, I wish, they asked them, name a foreign leader that you admire. And the answer, well, I don't admire anyone.
Right.
and that's what he's trying to say now, because it made it look like he couldn't even think of a foreign leader. I mean, the other, I guess, what was this? The vice president guy goes, Merkel. Yeah, who doesn't know who Merkel is? Well, what do you admire about Merkel? But, Angela Merkel. Like, yeah, I know one, But, unfortunately, this really should have been the year for the Libertarian Party. It really should have been. And, this campaign just never really got any traction, starting from the beginning. I didn't go to the convention. They wanted me to go down there and talk, but it was over a holiday weekend. It was like over, what was it, Labor Day or Memorial, what it was. And I just didn't really feel like flying down there. But, and especially, too, when so many people, you ask them these polls, I wish we had a third choice. I wish there was a choice between, Hillary and Trump. But then the fact that the presidential debates would not let any of the third parties. But I think they should have had both of them. Put Jill Stein up there, fine, But and in fact, the debates would have been more substantive if they were up there, because they would have had to talk more about the issues than just about their personality flaws, or their emails, or their sexual escapades. But the fact that so many people wanted a third alternative, yet the presidential debate still refused to allow them because they couldn't meet this arbitrary 15%. When what's his name? Who's that? Perot. When Perot ran, he was polling lower than Gary Johnson going into the first debate. It was the debate that catapulted him. And it's not like he even did that good, about his take my grandmother out in the car, I'm going to get under the trunk, I'm going to fix the debt, and he got a lot of votes. I think just being in the debates legitimizes you. Because I think a lot of other people, when they get a poll and they see these other candidates, they're like, what are these names even doing here? Like, what is it? Some kind of, they probably don't even realize that they're actually viable. Because, well, if this was a real candidate, why isn't he in the debate? The debate kind of narrows it. In fact, there wasn't even a question in the debate about third-party candidates, or nobody even brought up their names. So they didn't even want people to realize that there were people that were being excluded. I actually thought Trump should have brought it up, because I think when the third-party candidates are in the race, I think Trump ends up going up a little bit. I think he ends up, because Jill Stein only takes votes from Hillary, right? No, he's not. Trump isn't going to lose a vote to Jill Stein. Only Hillary is going to lose votes from Jill Stein. And then Gary Johnson is just kind of pulling. Even actually a little bit more from Hillary. Because Trump, this is one interesting thing about it. See, the Trump supporters are much more loyal and much more enthusiastic about Trump, because they actually think that his presidency could make a difference. I mean, they might be right, but maybe they're not. But like when Obama ran for office 8 years ago, there was a lot of enthusiasm, because people actually believed that just putting like a black man in office was going to be different. Like, oh, all these white presidents have screwed everything up. Let's just put this black guy in there. Especially in the black community. I mean, if you remember some of the interviews that they had. It was, oh, once Obama, my troubles are over. I never have anything to worry about. Right? People actually believed that. They were enthusiastic about it. There's no more enthusiasm. There's no enthusiasm for Hillary Clinton. Right? I mean, if things got so much worse for blacks under Obama's administration, what hope do they have in Hillary? I mean, if Obama couldn't do anything, where is Hillary going to succeed where he failed? So there's no enthusiasm for her candidacy. But I think you have a lot of people that actually think that the Trump candidacy could be a game changer, because he's obviously different than anybody else that occupied the White House. And so maybe this has changed. Maybe there's a chance. That's why I think a lot of the, if you look at some of the consumer confidence numbers, they had been rising. And I think they were rising because a lot of Trump voters were confident. They actually thought that he could make America great again. And now that Trump is falling in the polls, you can see we had the biggest drop in consumer confidence in 11 months, the most recent numbers. I think that has to do with the diminishing prospects of Trump winning. And in fact, if you look at the rallies, Trump talks, and he gets 10, 20,000 people to show up. Hillary Clinton, she couldn't even fill this room. If Hillary was here right now at a rally, you'd have fewer people than this. Right? So there's no enthusiasm there. It's just people are voting. But I think the thing about politics or the election is it really confirms how bad the economy is. That's why Donald Trump won, because there's so many Republicans who understand that the economy is screwed up, and they don't think another typical Republican is going to do anything about it, because they lived through Bush, and things were bad under Bush, and then they just continued to get worse under Obama. And the fact that Bernie Sanders, a Jewish socialist, right, from New York, could get so many votes, all over the country. A New York Jew socialist admitted he's a socialist, and he got all these. He would have beat Hillary Clinton if it wasn't for the black vote. The blacks just voted for Hillary just because of Clinton name. But if it wasn't for that, she would have lost. And if those WikiLeaks would have come out about her Wall Street speeches, with the text of those speeches, she lost. But the reason that Bernie was so popular is because the economy is that bad. In fact, I thought one of the interesting WikiLeaks that from Donna Brazil to Podesta that nobody even talks about. And Donna Brazil is one of the big cheerleaders for Obama. Every time like a jobs report comes out, she's tweeting about how great it is. Like, oh, this is a great success. Obama's creating this great economy, creating all these jobs. Yet in this private email, she's emailing about how awful things are, how people are telling her that they're miserable, that they have no hope, because there's so much despair out there. She says, yes, we're creating jobs, but they suck. Right? They're low wage, they're part-time, and meanwhile, half of their income has to go to their rent, and the rents keep going up. So privately, she's just like Hillary Clinton. She has a private position, and she has a public position, which of course shouldn't have been news, because every politician has a private position and a public position. They just don't get caught admitting it. That's the problem is Hillary Clinton got outed because she said it in actual conversation with a lot of people. It wasn't like in private. She was speaking in Goldman Sachs, so there are a lot of people in that room. But I think it was interesting that she realizes how bad the economy is. Everybody, Obama wants to pretend that the U.S. economy has recovered. In fact, when Hillary, in the debates with Trump, she'll say, well, we don't want to go back to the failed policies of the Bush administration. Like Trump is trying to take us back to those failed policies. What do you mean take us back? We never left those failed policies. Those failed policies were continued under Obama. They were just expanded. We just took the same bad policies and just made them worse because we made them bigger. That's all Obama did. I mean, but government grew under Bush, and then it just grew faster under Obama. And the Federal Reserve did the exact same thing under both terms. Right? What did the Fed do under Bush? They inflated a housing bubble to cover up the bursted dot-com bubble that Bush inherited from Clinton. Well, what did the Fed do under Obama? They created an even bigger bubble to cover up the problems of the housing bubble that burst, when George Bush was leaving. Now, I think the Obama bubble is far bigger than anything that was inflated under Bush. It's just that it looks like this one is not going to burst until after he leaves office. So that is helpful to Hillary Clinton, because that's what helped Obama. What really elected Obama was Bush, because the economy collapsed under Bush, and it was like, okay, we just got to do something different. Right? Anybody probably could have won against Bush.
So when do you think that this bubble is going to burst during the Clinton term?
Yeah, well, probably, yeah, I think Obama's going to get out of Dodge. I mean, there's no guarantee, but there's only a few months left. So the odds of this thing collapsing in the next few months are probably slim.
Do you think it's maybe advantageous if the libertarians may not get elected and get stuck holding the bag?
No, that's not advantageous. It would be great, of course, it would be great if we got elected.
Well, here's the thing. So, hey, you got libertarians in, and then you have a worse collapse outward, and it's like, those libertarians, look what they did.
No, well, the thing is, the best thing that they got going, if they get 5% of the vote, at least they get matching funds 4 years from now. So they're polling over 5% now. So that's one of the reasons to vote for Johnson is, you know, so that the next guy who runs, which won't be Gary Johnson, this is his last shot, he said. But at least whoever runs in 4 years will have some money. But I think that this bubble is much bigger because look at all of the air that has been, you know, blown into it, right? Because the last bubble, the housing bubble, what did it take to inflate that bubble? It took 1% interest rates, and the Fed left them there for, I don't know, maybe a year and a half, and then it immediately started to raise them back up, only it did a quarter point every time they met, right? Well, what has the Fed done? The Fed went not to 1, the Fed went to 0. And this time, you know, and then they left them there for 6, 7 years. And now they finally started to raise rates, and they're not doing a quarter point a meeting, they're doing a quarter point a year. I mean, this is far more slow than what they, in fact, if they raise rates in December, which the jury's still out, I still don't think they're going to do it. But even if they do, that's it, they're done, that's the end of it. And then they're going to start cutting again. They're already preparing that, they're already saying, look, you know, we're going to leave rates low for indefinitely for years and years and years. And we had quantitative easing, we had 3 rounds of QE. I mean, the Fed didn't do any of that to inflate the housing bubble. And so the bubbles are created by all the cheap money. And the cheaper the money is, and the longer, the more mistakes that get made, right? So we have so many more mistakes that have been built into the economy now. The economy is much more screwed up today than it was in 2007, 2008. So when this bubble bursts, the consequences are going to be far more horrific. And I think the Fed understands this, and that's why they're not raising rates. That's why they haven't shrunk the balance sheet. You know, they talked about shrinking the balance sheet years ago. In fact, when Ben Bernanke first did QE1, he went to Congress and he was actually questioned about, hey, you know, you're monetizing the debt. This is not good. And Ben Bernanke said, no, we're not monetizing the debt. What are you talking about? Monetizing the debt is when a central bank becomes a permanent source of funding for the government. We're just buying these bonds temporarily. It's an emergency, and as soon as the emergency is over, we're going to liquidate the bonds. Now, at the time, I said he was lying. I said, that's impossible. There's no way they're going to liquidate these bonds because no one will buy them. I said, once they go in, I said, that's the end of it. They can never stop. And here we are, 7, 8 years later, they haven't sold a single bond. And not only haven't they not sold any bonds, every time they get interest, they reinvest it in more bonds. Anytime a bond matures, they just buy another one. And so the Fed is doing this for a reason. They haven't raised interest rates for a reason. They keep talking about raising rates because they have to talk about it, because they can't do it. But by talking about it, they create the illusion or the impression that the economy is actually strong enough for higher rates, but then they don't raise rates and prove that it's not. So this bubble is going to pop. I think what's going to happen is, after the election, assuming that Hillary wins, and again, it's not, look, the polls certainly look like Hillary's going to win, but we'll see. The polls said that they were going to vote against Brexit. So I don't know. I mean, depending on turnout, I mean, you know, people will say who they're going to vote for at a poll, but are Hillary Clinton supporters going to actually get to the poll? I don't know. I think Trump supporters are going to vote. I think they're going to make sure they vote. So I think his people will turn out, not because, you know, they get a call from a phone bank, because they actually believe that this is their one shot. They know things are lousy. They have a part-time job or 3 part-time jobs. They have no savings. They're drowning in debt. And this is a guy saying he'll make America great again. Hillary Clinton keeps saying, well, America is great. Well, the voters know it's not. They don't buy that. So we don't know. And there could be, too, a lot of people could be embarrassed to admit they're going to vote for Trump. Because what are you, racist? What are you, sexist? You know, so in private, they might vote for him. And I bet there's a lot of people who actually believe that electing Trump is going to create a disaster, and they want to see it. It's like, okay, things are going to be that bad? Yeah, I mean, it's good entertainment. I I mean, Trump was saying to black voters, hey, why don't vote for me? What do you got to lose? Yeah, what do you got to lose? Nothing. I got nothing. I got nothing to lose. And there are people that just, you know, there are people that just like to see, look, when people, there was an accident on the road, everybody's looking at an accident. Right? You ever go to the movies and you start rooting for the bad guy? Right? So it's, for a lot of people, it's just theater. It's just entertainment. I mean, the Donald Trump presidency would be much more entertaining to watch than Hillary. I'm sure all the comics are probably going to vote for Trump. So we'll see. But assuming that it's Hillary, and if Hillary wins, I think that right now there's a lot of pressure on the Fed to talk about how great the economy is. Because Hillary is running on, hey, the economy is good now and we want to continue it. So the Fed has to, you know, go along with that narrative. And the Fed is very political. And in fact, one, you know, way you know it's political, if you didn't already know, I saw an interview, or listened to an interview with Ben Bernanke on an internet radio show. And this guy goes to Ben Bernanke, and he plays him some clips of Ben Bernanke in 2005, when he's talking about how there's no housing bubble, and everything is great, and anybody who says there's a housing bubble is wrong, and there's nothing to worry about, and the economy is not. I mean, the worst, he couldn't have been more wrong. So the guy plays these clips, and then he says to Ben Bernanke, how do you feel when you listen to these clips now, right, knowing what happened? How do you feel? And then this was his answer. He said, well, you know, I couldn't exactly be honest at the time because, you know, I was speaking as a member of the administration. And I'm like, what? You weren't a member of the administration. You were the chair of the Fed. But in his mind, he was part of the Bush administration. And he admitted that I couldn't exactly say that, you know, everything was going to fall apart. So if he admitted that he was just spinning for Bush, then why wouldn't Yellen be shilling for Obama? All right, that's what they're doing. They always want to help re-elect the incumbent. So I think once this election is over, then the Fed no longer has to pretend that everything is great. Because, oh, the election's over. Now they can acknowledge, oh, you know what? The economy is not as strong as we thought. Things have happened that we didn't foresee, and it's just an unexpected weakness. We'll blame it on, you know, something happening overseas. And then they can start cutting rates again, because they don't want to come to the aid of the economy now because they want to pretend it doesn't need their help. But I think after the election, and of course Hillary Clinton, I mean, you got a lot of problems, right? What's going to happen after the election? You've got Obamacare premiums are set to rise by about 25% at the beginning of the year. That's a pretty big number, you know, on top of all the other problems that people have. They're going to have to be spending all that extra money for their insurance. But I mean, and then more, you know, as more of the minimum wage kicks in and more people start losing their jobs. I think there's a lot of people that have several part-time jobs now that they've hobbled together. You know, that's really the secret of Obama job creation. I mean, talk about, you know, failing yet turning that into success. So Obama creates a program, Obamacare, which basically makes it so expensive to hire full-time workers that nobody will. Right? So you have all these companies now that used to have full-time workers that now have a completely part-time workforce. Because that's the way you get out of Obamacare, is to have part-time workers instead of full-time workers. But if you're going to have a business where all you employ are part-time people, by definition you're going to have more people. Because each one is working fewer hours, so you got to hire more people. So if I fire a full-time worker and I hire 2 part-time workers to replace them, Obama takes credit for the extra job. Hey, I just created a job. Because, I lost 1, I gained 2, it's a net of 1. Because when they put the jobs numbers out every month, they just report the net. Right? They say how many jobs were created. They don't break it down between full-time jobs lost and part-time jobs gained. And in fact, one of the reasons there's so many jobs is because a lot of people have 2 and 3. Look at the number of people every month of multiple job holders. It keeps going up. And this is from statistics. If you have 3 part-time jobs, but the hours of all 3 add up to a full-time job, they get counted as 3 full-time jobs. That's how the government scores it, even though they're just 3 part-time jobs. So that's why, incomes are falling. If you look at what's happened during the Obama recovery, this is the first recovery that's worse than the recession that we recovered from. And the average person did worse in the recovery than he did during the recession. If you look at the decline in average wages, if you look at the increase in household debt and the decline in their net worth. I mean, some people like to make a big deal out of the fact that total household debt has gone down. Yes, because the mortgages have gone. Because home ownership is at like a 60-year low. So people don't have mortgages anymore, but they don't have houses, so they don't have their equity. But if you look at their credit card debt, The student loans have gone off the charts. Look at what's happened to student loans in the last 8 years, right? And then you've got auto. We have another bubble in the automobile market. Look at auto debt off the charts. All these people leasing and taking out. So we have all this debt, and now prices are starting to rise. So I think what is going to happen in next year is, a lot of the consumer prices that are already on the upswing are going to continue. What's been kind of masking the rising core CPI, apart from the manipulation that goes on to underreported, is that we did have the collapse in the oil price. But now oil prices are back at about $50 a barrel. They started the year about 30. So if we're $50, $60 a barrel in January, we're almost got a doubling of the price of oil, and then the year-over-year numbers are going to start to look up. But I think you're going to start to see inflation coming up. I think the Fed is going to be cutting rates because we're going to be back in recession. And I think the main thing that's been propping us up the last few years is the widespread belief that the Fed's policies actually work. Everybody thinks that it worked. They think the Fed can normalize interest rates, shrink their balance sheet, and that has created a big bid in the dollar. That's created a bid in our bond market, and that's enabled us to go deeper and deeper into debt and grow the bubble bigger and bigger. But I think when the Fed has to give up this pretense of tightening, and they have to acknowledge that we're back in recession, and now they got to cut rates, and now they're going negative. They've already talked about this. They're going to take rates negative. Because if they have to start cutting from 0.5%, normally when there's a recession, they do about 400 basis points of easing. But you don't have 400 basis points when you're starting at half a percent. So all you can do is go negative, and they've talked about it, and they're going to do QE4, and they've talked about expanding the QE to buy more stuff, buy more assets, corporate bonds, common stock. But I think when the Fed has to go to stimulus again, I think people are going to finally figure it out. Because if we've just gone through an entire business cycle, we've gone from recession to recovery and back to recession, and the Fed never raised rates, right? If they couldn't raise them this time, how are they going to do it next time? Right? Because the reason they couldn't raise rates is because we had so much debt, we couldn't afford a rate hike. Well, if we couldn't afford a rate hike with a $20 trillion national debt, how are we going to afford it with a $30 trillion debt? If the Fed couldn't shrink a $4.5 billion balance sheet, how are they going to shrink a $6 or $7 or $8 trillion balance sheet? And and coming into this recession as weak as we are, because this recovery has been the weakest recovery in, I think, post-war America, the weakest one, despite the fact that we've had the most stimulus of any recovery. So despite massive amounts of so-called stimulus, this has been the weakest recovery we've ever had. And it's also one of the longest, by the way. They've kept it going. It's, I think, maybe like the third longest already, so it's already on borrowed time. So when we relapse back into recession, maybe in the first year of a Clinton presidency, and then the Fed has to cut and inflation starts running out of control. And of course the Fed was always saying, well, inflation is low, but if it ever gets up to 2%, then we'll do something about it. Well, that's all BS. They're not going to do anything about it. But people think they are. But when inflation gets to 3%, 4%, and they don't do anything, now they're initially going to talk about higher inflation as a good thing, right? Because they're already saying, like Janet Yellen was just quoted as saying, well, I think we can let the economy run hot for a while. Right? Just the Keynesians like to refer to the economy like it's a car. Like you can just step on the gas and step on the brake. And so if there's a lot of inflation, you got to step on the brake. But now she's saying, well, we can let it run hot. Because what she's doing is laying a foundation for allowing there to be higher inflation. Because they've already convinced everybody that inflation is good, right? That's the new thing. That we need inflation, that price stability is dangerous, and prices have to go up by at least 2%. And now they're going to say, well, they go 3%, 4%, it's still good. I guess I'm out of time because he's here to kick me off.
I just wanted to know what Mr. Schiff thought about the Affordable Care Act as far as its prospects with the premium increases coming on and people.
Yeah, look, the whole thing is a perfect example of how government works. Because first of all, government was a problem in healthcare. Right? The reason that healthcare was so expensive was because of government involvement. Whenever government gets involved in something, whether it's education, whether it's housing, whether it's healthcare, the price always goes up. Before the government got involved with Medicare and Medicaid, people didn't have any problem. Doctors weren't expensive. I mean, my dad tells me, he grew up in a relatively poor family, 8 kids. His father was a carpenter, but when he got sick, his mother picked up the phone. The doctor showed up, came right to the house. I think nobody had a problem. Everybody got medical care. And my father sold insurance. He had his insurance agency in the 60s, and he had a major medical policy. And it was like $2 a month. That's all it cost. And I think he said that the cap, though, the most it would ever pay was like $5,000. And he said in all the years he had his practice, nobody ever hit the max. I mean, no matter what happened to you, no matter what, you couldn't even spend that much money. You know, you're in a hospital for a month. And of course, a lot of things, you know, if you got pregnant with it, you know, you just paid for it. Childbirth wasn't expensive. Government got involved in all this stuff and started subsidizing it and encouraging insurance, and then you had these moral hazards and third-party payers and all this kind of stuff. And so instead of recognizing that the problem was government, they said, oh, the solution is let's have even more government. And they always say, well, why is health care more expensive? They'll say, well, because it's more sophisticated, right? It's better. Well, wait a minute. Computers get better every year. Why don't they get more expensive? No, they always get cheaper. I mean, the free market makes stuff better and cheaper at the same time. Healthcare should be cheaper. I look at education. Can you imagine, why is it more expensive now to educate people when we have the internet? I mean, before you used to have a library. You don't even need books anymore. I mean, you can have one teacher. Education should be cheaper now than it was 50 years ago. Everything should be cheaper. They didn't even have photocopy machines back then. They had to do everything by hand. They did nothing. How could it be more expensive? It's all because of government. So government comes in and they create this ridiculous system, which now, you know, because, and here's the worst part about Obamacare, or this whole, the whole idea is that, oh, we can't have insurance companies discriminate based on pre-existing conditions. Why not? They have to. Otherwise, it's not insurance. You can't buy fire insurance after your house burns down, right? That's a pre-existing condition. My house burned down. Well, why can't I get fire insurance? Well, you can't buy it after the fact. You can only buy insurance for something that's probably not going to happen. Because why would an insurance company want to sell you a policy when they're going to have to pay? The reason the insurance company sells you fire insurance is because they know your house is probably not going to burn down. That's why they want to sell the policy. But obviously, if enough people buy it, somebody's house is going to burn down. So the whole idea that you can eliminate pre-existing conditions is nonsense from the beginning. You can't do that. And the reason that they said, well, people lose their insurance when they lose their job. Well, whose damn fault is that? It's the government that did that through the tax code. Nobody gets their automobile insurance from their employer. Nobody gets their life insurance from their employer, or their you know, insurance. Well, why do you get your health insurance through your employer? The government did that through the tax code. So now when you lose your job, you lose your insurance. That's part of the pre-existing condition. If somebody develops a condition and then they lose their job. So what we really need to do is get government completely out of health care. You know, let people buy their own health care. Stop, you know, turning employers into, you know, healthcare providers so they can concentrate on, you know, growing their businesses and not, you know, providing health care. Well, why should you acquire health care? Just because you hire somebody. And of course, I predicted as soon as they passed this that it was going to be a disaster. Because what happened is once they tell people that you can buy insurance after you get sick, well, now no one needs it anymore. No one's going to buy it. The only people that buy are the people who are already sick. That's why the insurance companies are losing a fortune. The premiums are skyrocketing because the healthy people aren't paying in. And the insurance companies have to keep paying out to the sick people who buy the policies. And in fact, the Supreme Court even knew that it wasn't going to work. And this was an irony, and I pointed this out when the Supreme Court handed down the decision. So the government challenged, or there was a challenge to Obamacare, and they said, look, this is unconstitutional because you can't have a penalty for not doing something. The government can't put a tax on, or a penalty for not buying insurance. And the Supreme Court said, look, the penalty is so low, it doesn't compel your behavior. They said if it was higher, then it would be unconstitutional. But because because the penalty is so low, and it doesn't actually force anybody to do anything, because you just pay the, you know, such a low thing, they said that it was constitutional. I thought it was a bad decision, but at least it showed the court knew that it wasn't going to work. Because it's much cheaper to pay the small penalty than to buy the overpriced insurance that you don't even need, because just wait till you get sick. You know, why would somebody in their 20s buy insurance for no reason, right? So the whole thing was going to fail. It's blowing up. Its costs are skyrocketing. But maybe what the plan was, look, we're going to do this so we can create even more problems. And now the solution is single payer, right? Because they couldn't have gone directly to socialized medicine. So they had to screw it up even more and then go to socialized medicine. So it's like the camel's nose under the tent. The government keeps screwing up the economy and then saying, oh, we can fix it with more government. And then they screw it up again, and then they finally can go all in and say, well, this proves capitalism totally doesn't work. Right? And so now we have to have, social, single payer, that's where we're headed, because nobody can survive in this industry.
But Peter, I think you touched on it.
Wait a second, we have a moderator.
So, questions? Carry on.
Mr. Schiff, I would like your opinion on a question that I had for a long time. Why is an Austrian school of economics more popular in the financial industry? I know why government likes bad economics, but why isn't Austrian school of economics popular in banks and such?
Well, think about it, right? I mean, first of all these guys, one of the most lucrative things that Wall Street does is underwrite government bonds, right? And so they like cheap money, and they like to be embedded with government because it's free money when you can, buy these bonds and sell them to the Fed. Because the Fed can't buy bonds directly; they have to buy them in the market. They have to go through a dealer. But they have a tight relationship with government. Everybody wants special favors, so you want to have your economists that are going to be philosophically in line with the government that you're lobbying. A lot of these guys go from Wall Street to Harvard to government. They stay in this circle, and so in order to be in that circle, you have to be in that club. But Wall Street likes cheap money. They want it. Why should you actually have to earn it if you can just get it for nothing? They want asset bubbles. They want rising stock prices. They don't care about the underlying economy. So all this serves their purposes. Just like politicians believe in Keynesianism because it gets them votes. It allows them to be Santa Claus because it validates what they're doing. Oh, the economy is weak. Oh, we've got to give out money, right? And the academics. So there is no real incentive. Anybody who's really an Austrian is like an outcast. You're not welcome anywhere. You're not in the club. They don't want you on Wall Street. They don't want you in government. They don't want you in the Ivy League schools. You gotta go over here. Right? But
Professor Wall?
The format of this is that each of our panelists gets a shot at every question. So Doug, do you want to pipe in on either?
No, I absolutely agree with everything Peter said, except he doesn't go far enough.
Go a little further.
You're talking about, the medical system. Sure, the government shouldn't have anything to do with it. It screwed it up. But the government shouldn't have anything to do with anything. As an anarchist, I don't believe the government. When you argue these things, you cannot play on the enemy's field. You have to challenge the premises that the government itself is evil and doesn't have a right to exist. It serves no useful purpose. So that's all I got to say.
Well, I would say though the only reason to have a government is to prevent the worst from arising to take its place. You got to have some minimal limited government just to prevent a worse government from filling the vacuum. Because anarchy really can't exist because I think a government is always going to happen. It's impossible to stop it. So you have to preempt it by creating one. But the key is to try to create a government and minimize its power. And nobody has really been able to do that for any length of time. That's the problem.
Well, I understand that argument, but I'd like to try it. Just see what happens.
Well, it's got to be better than what we got.
Yes.
Can I just say one more detailed question? Sorry, I might not have expressed myself well, but I don't mean big banks which have big relationships with the Federal Reserve and such. But when I say why is an Austrian school of economics more popular in finance, I mean the small funds managers and the independent companies who had to deal with resource allocation and economic forecasting and this kind of things.
There are some hedge fund guys who are Austrians. There are some guys who are libertarians and Ayn Rand type people. They're there, but they're just in the fringes. They're not. Some of them are very successful. There are some very wealthy, very successful people that are Austrian. There are people in the investment business. I get people who are brokers and people who follow me, who listen to me, who email me. So they're there. And some of them don't necessarily want to speak up, but they're behind the scenes. But it's obviously doesn't dominate the culture.
No, that's quite accurate.
So what would you advise a college freshman or high school senior to do if he actually wants to follow in your footsteps?
Well, Doug already told you.
Well, you two gentlemen are very intelligent and insightful, and you always give these very big and general suggestions. But how do you follow up with those plans? What sort of skills should you develop?
It depends on what you're interested in, but I think today you have so much information in your cell phone. You can access information that 20 years ago you couldn't get unless you went to a university. So you can find what you're interested in and learn what you need to learn without a teacher, without a university, without paying a lot of money. You can be more effective in what you're learning, and you can, and it's unfortunate that there isn't more opportunity here, because I always thought a young guy, if I was 18 years old, I could just go to a company that normally hires college grads and say, look, they don't know any more than I do. I'll work for half the price. What do you want me to do? Or work for free for a year, and then because you can gain, I think, work experience. If you work, even if you work for nothing for a few years, that's better than going into debt in college. Because then after a few years, you have real work experience. What does somebody with a college degree have? Nothing. Because everybody has the same worthless degree. And I'd rather, if I was hiring somebody who's 22, 23, what'd you do the last 4 years? I went to college, versus I had this internship, here's where I worked. I'd rather have the guy with work experience than drinking experience.
Previously, I attacked the audience for not eating pizza. Now I'm going to attack the two speakers, so I'll be an equal opportunity attacker of everybody. I have two criticisms of you two gentlemen. One of the statist. We do have anarchy right now between countries. The relationship of Canada and Chile is one of anarchy in the sense that there's no government above them. The relationship of the U.S. and Burundi is one of anarchy. So if you're really against anarchy, you have to favor, logically, world government, and most people don't favor world government. So that would be one argument against you. And now I'd like to criticize both of you on this bashing of college. I appreciate what Doug said about me as being a good teacher, and I appreciate that. My colleague Leo over here is also a devoted free market economist, as is my colleague Bill Barnett, as is my colleague John Levendis, and we have another 4 or 5 free market professors here, Bruning and Viator in the law school, and my colleague here, Nick Capaldi, who teaches business ethics. Now, I realize that this is a unique situation where there are 2 or 3 others in addition. We have almost 10 professors out of about 300, which means we have a majority of the intellectual firepower. The only reason you guys are invited here is because we have a free enterprise economics club, and we have a libertarian club as well. I imagine most universities would not invite the likes of you because you're too free enterprise, so you're biting the hand that feeds you. Look, right now,
I spoke at Yale and Harvard, so I bet.
Well, touche. I've been there myself, but that's another issue. I guess they want some skunk at the garden party. You're a bunch of skunks. Paul Krugman writes every day in the New York Times garbage. But he has a Nobel Prize in economics, and what I am trying to do, and I speak for my colleagues also, is trying to train the next generation of people who can take on the next generation of Paul Krugmans. If you don't have a PhD, and only those guys have PhDs, then we're in a worse position than if some of us also have PhDs. So a lot of my former students at undergraduates went off and got a PhD, and I've got about 8 or 10 out there who are former students of mine who are now teaching at various universities and running free enterprise. Now, there are many ways to promote liberty. One of the ways is the Libertarian Party. Another way is Donald Trump, vis-a-vis Hillary, the horrible Hillary. Another way is the Free State Project. Another way, everyone goes to New Hampshire, which is some benefit. Another way is you guys, promoting liberty in the way you do it. And I think that, I believe with Uncle Mao, let 1,000 flowers bloom. There are many ways toward liberty, and one of the ways is through college.
Well, I'm not saying that college isn't right for some people. It's just that far too many people go
Well,
And a lot of people are steered there
Well, I
based on
agree.
the idea that if you don't go to college, you'll never succeed.
Well, I agree with you that
Yeah.
there's too much of it, and I also agree that if you take a course in feminist studies or literature or any of that stuff, and I agree with Doug that, you know, the STEM issues, physics, mathematics, chemistry are also good. Say that economics is also important as a way of promoting liberty. So I appreciate you coming here. I wouldn't have invited you for the second or third time if I didn't appreciate you, but I did feel that I had to make a claim that, you know, we're doing something good also. Not that everyone should go to college and get a PhD and become another college professor and promote liberty that way, but some people have to do that.
Yes,
Otherwise,
no,
we lose the intellectual battle.
No, that is correct. I'm not trying to say that it isn't right for some people. We need professors. We need people. We need people to teach our children, and we need, you know. But we have now. I mean, I don't know how many people saw my. I was in the New Orleans conference 4 years ago, and I went out and I did a interview. I went up around Bourbon Street. And if you haven't seen it, go on in YouTube, Schiff College. And I went up Bourbon Street, and I just talked to everybody who I could find, who was, you know, a busboy, a barker, bouncer, you know, stripper, you know, whoever, you know, pedicab driver. And I said, you know, did you go to college? Yes, I did. What was your major? When did you graduate? How much do you owe? Everybody I talked to, doing all manner of menial jobs, went to college and had a degree. And, you know, none of these, I mean, what were they doing with the degree? Nothing. They were doing what they could have done straight out of high school. In fact, they didn't even need to go to high school. They could have done it out of junior high school, right? But the point was, you know, we had all these people, everybody, going to college, getting into debt, and then the politicians want to make a big deal about how many Americans have college degrees. Who cares if they don't learn anything and if they don't mean anything? You see, a college degree would be far more valuable if fewer people had it. Right? And then a college degree would mean something, right? And yes, we want some people going to college, but if everybody goes to college, then what good is it if you got a degree? I mean, at one point, a high school degree was a big deal. Graduating from high school, oh, you made it, you graduated, you're a high school graduate. That was something. Now that's nothing. Everybody graduates high school. Whether you can read or not, you're going to graduate. And then they send them to college. You know, they have remedial math. I bet they have remedial English. I mean, if you haven't mastered math, basic arithmetic, by the time you're in college, what are you doing in college? Obviously, you need to do something else. Academics is not your thing. But, you know, it doesn't matter. So, no, everybody has to go to college, no matter how dumb they are, they still have to go. Why? You know? So that's all my only point. It's just, and that's all government. If it wasn't for government and all these subsidies and government getting, you know, the word education is not in the Constitution, it's not in the bill. The word school is not in the Constitution, it's not in the Bill of Rights, it's nowhere. If the Founding Fathers thought it was so important, why isn't it there? In fact, they thought it was so important, that's why it's not there, because they didn't want the government to be involved in it.
Mr. Case?
I agree.
One more question.
For Mr. Schiff, you're saying there's an even bigger bubble out there now. And I guess I've probably heard you say that it's more like in the dollar itself, or is there some other particular sector where you're saying it's looking bubbly? And I also wonder, how can you tell the difference between the situation where we have some big sort of bubble in the stock market or in the dollar versus like Japan, where it seems like they're trying to blow up a bubble forever and it's just kind of stagnant, nobody wants to invest, and we could be in that situation as opposed to a big bubble situation. How do you tell the difference?
Well, I mean, I think the biggest bubble is in the bond market, and it's global. It's not just the United States. I mean, bond prices are too high, interest rates are too low. In fact, in some countries, they're negative, which makes no sense whatsoever because there's a time value of money, and it's worth more today than it is in the future, but negative rates flips that upside down. But the bond bubble basically is the foundation for all the other bubbles because it's artificially low interest rates that are the reason that asset prices are inflated. Stock prices, real estate prices, it's all because interest rates are so low that these other prices are so high because you always discount you know, what's the stock worth? It's the present value of its future income. But you discount it by the interest rate. And so these low interest rates are skewing everything. And then of course, with money being debased, I mean, people want to buy, you know, art, they want to buy collectibles, rare cars, I mean, you name it. I mean, anything everything is going up in price, except maybe the one asset you think would be going up is gold, but like gold is actually going down relative to a lot of these other assets because people are just not choosing it, they're choosing these other assets to hide out in. But there's also a bubble in the dollar in that, you know, the dollar is overvalued versus other currencies, and that's about perception. But I do think that the dollar is going to be the first one to ultimately crack, because the way the Federal Reserve maintains the bond bubble is by creating dollars, because the Fed maintains low interest rates by buying up bonds. And to the extent that there are private buyers or foreign central banks that'll do their dirty work, then they don't have to do it. But to the extent that foreign central banks back away, to the extent that private speculators no longer want to gamble on treasuries, then the Fed will be the buyer of last resort, because the Fed can't let interest rates go up, because then everything collapses. Then the government has to default on its bonds, all the big banks fail, you know, depositors, everything collapses if interest rates go up. That's why they're at zero. And so I think in order to prop up all these other bubbles and prevent them from deflating, they will sacrifice the dollar, and then the dollar will crack first, but ultimately that will bring down the bond bubble and the rest of it. They can't maintain it indefinitely. Of course, the best thing that the Fed can do is let the bubble prick, because that's, the sooner we prick the bubble, the sooner we can start digging our way out of this hole. All we're doing now is digging it deeper, but a lot of it is just political, because nobody wants to acknowledge the problem or what needs to be done to solve it, so they want to keep the bubble going for as long as they can.
Yeah, it's creating huge distortions and misallocations of capital in the marketplace. And when those things come to an end, it's going to result in bankruptcies and lots of unemployment and so forth. But it's even worse than that, because when you keep interest rates artificially low, it discourages people from saving. Now, why is that important? The only way that you can get wealthy as a society or as an individual is by producing more than you consume and saving the difference. But when you have negative or zero interest rates, certainly in real terms, forget about nominal terms, it discourages people from saving and it encourages them to consume. So this is actually destructive of civilization itself, because in today's world, science and technology only advance with capital. And if you don't build capital through savings, you're going to bring down these basic structures. So it's very serious.
You know, it's interesting, I saw Alan Greenspan interviewed on television, and he was asked about this new normal, this slow growth economy, and Greenspan was very correct. He said, look, it's not about a new normal. The reason we have no economic growth is because we have no capital investment. We have no productivity. We have no savings. And he said, this is the problem, right? A lack of savings, a lack of capital investment, a lack of productivity. That's why we're having slow growth. But then he completely exonerated the Fed. And so, well, the Fed didn't do it wrong. So wait a minute, why do we have no savings? Because of the Fed. And it's the Fed that's monetizing all the government debt. It's the Fed that's got interest rates at zero. How can you lament the fact that there's no savings, but then not castigate the Fed for having 0% rates? Because who's going to save when rates are zero? Who's going to save when the Fed is promising to destroy the value of whatever you happen to save? But Alan Greenspan doesn't want to criticize the Fed because he is the Fed. He wrote this playbook that they're all following, and that they're just taking it to an extreme level. But they're just expanding on what Greenspan put in motion, because he was the architect of this policy. But just it has to get more and more extreme in order to keep this thing going.
Thank you, Mr. Casey and Mr. Schiff. Also, everyone, please, we very much appreciate if you give Facebook a like to Loyola Economics Club and subscribe to our YouTube channel.